Hello everyone, and welcome to one of our last videos we'll do before your exam because it's only just just under 3 weeks away. But as you know, yesterday something very important happened that we had a public holiday solely because the RBA was making an announcement and for no other reason. There was definitely no horse racing or anything on because horse racing is dumb. But the RBA made an announcement they were decreasing the cash rate by 0.15 basis points to 0.1. It's historic, it's unprecedented. And I thought it's really good to spend some time going through kind of the implications of that, what they're trying to achieve through it. There's a little bit more that we don't know yet. There are also some things that you don't really need to know about it. So I've tried to break it down to really simple form, how they're expecting this cash rate cut to impact on the economy and some of the logic behind why they are doing it. So then you don't have to hunt through RBA reports because who wants to do that when I can just do it for you? So the decision on November 3rd, 2020 at 2:30 p.m. the RBA announced a reduction of the cash rate by 0.15 basis points to an unprecedented 0.1%. That is unheard of. It's basically like the RBA doesn't have much left in the tank if they want to stimulate the economy anymore. You've probably heard them talk a lot about things called quantitative easing. Some of your teachers might have even gone through that in class. It's not in the studies line, so I don't really care about it for the purpose of you doing VCE economics. It's probably good to know about, but not right now. It's not going to come up on your exam. You don't need to talk about it. So we're just going to briefly go through the reasons for this decision and the likely impacts of it on the wider community. So the reasons. So there's a little statement from the RBA here. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. It's there. You can read it. You can read through the statement if you want. I can put a link for it in the description. But essentially, usually the RBA tries to achieve the goal of low inflation first, because it's seen as a precondition to achieving all of the other goals. However, at the moment, the RBA is more aiming to support jobs and economic growth to work alongside the most current budget. So supporting jobs and growth. So the RBA has essentially outlined that due to low rates of spending, that inflation is not a current priority. Instead, they're focusing on supporting jobs and growth, which is also known as everyone's favorite phrase from the 2017 exam. And they're also not expecting an increase in the cash rate for at least 3 years. So what we're looking at here is if you're getting any recent questions to tie into a goal, full employment is probably the one that's going to be most accurate. Economic growth also tying in with that quite nicely. But a lot of the reason for this is trying to do things that create better conditions for businesses so that they do not lay off workers because it brings down their costs. So let's go into some of the AD impacts of this decision. So assuming major banks pass on some or all of the rate cut, which is expected to be announced hopefully sometime today, because I want to pay less for my home loan, this should reduce interest repayments for households with mortgages and improve their cash flow. This should then hopefully lead to increases in private consumption spending, such as your increase in C, and therefore increased aggregate demand. And then you can flow that on to talking about any of your goals. So if there's an increase in aggregate demand, this is going to send a signal to businesses they need to invest and expand. Therefore, this can create more demand for labor and help decrease the unemployment rate or stop the unemployment rate from increasing. Same deal with economic growth. Increased aggregate demand sends a signal to increase production, therefore increasing economic growth. Then from the business point of view, businesses will have significantly lower costs for repaying interest on business loans. Therefore, they're more likely to conduct private investment spending to invest and expand, which increases aggregate demand. Once again, if they're doing that, they may then have an increased demand for labor, and that will help achieve the goal of full employment. Then finally, and one of the biggest reasons that I think is going to be good to talk about, especially in terms of full employment, is kind of looking at the exchange rate channel. So the decrease in interest rates should lead to foreign investors withdrawing their savings from Australian financial institutions, leading to an oversupply of the Australian dollar on the foreign exchange market and a depreciation of the Australian dollar. So this hasn't quite happened yet. The dollar actually went up a cent overnight based on overseas markets and stuff. But once the banks announce what they're going to do, this should then lead to a depreciation of the Australian dollar, which is then likely to make exports cheaper For our trading partners, China is currently recovering and buying a lot of our iron ore in their recovery, buying a lot of our exports, and imports are going to be more expensive. So we're going to import a lot less into the country. Obviously, if there's an increase in demand for exports and increased aggregate demand there, that's going to tell businesses they need to increase production, increasing economic growth, and increase employment through getting labor to fulfill or satisfy that increase in production. There's some of the major aggregate demand side impacts that you can talk about. And it's really easy step by step to talk about how that rate cut is going to impact that. And just a quick aside, like part of the reason why I'm doing this about the most recent rate cut and why I'm saying you should talk about it is it's kind of a difference that puts you ahead of other students. Although the exam was written in May, the best students, when you look at VCAA's examiners reports, always choose the most current up-to-date information and statistics. And we'll do another video next week with all the most up-to-date statistics. But if you're using this 0.1% cash rate, it's going to put you a slight bit ahead of the person using the 0.25 from March and make you look smarter than them, which, as we've been saying all along, is what you want. AS impacts the decision. So although monetary policy isn't specifically an aggregate supply side policy, it does impact aggregate supply by impacting the cost of production for businesses. So businesses, most of them have business loans. Therefore, if interest rates change, it affects the amount of interest they have to pay on those loans. If it decreases the business cost of production by less interest paid, it should lead to increased aggregate supply. So that's pretty simple there. If you're looking at it as an AS factor, which it is, interest rates are. If interest rates are lower, that should increase aggregate supply favorably and shift that AS curve. So if we're to draw that, just for the sake of doing a little bit more on this slide, we have our AD-AS diagram. So if we've got AD and we've got AS, that's a bloody good curve. Decreasing interest rates is going to create a new AS curve. I'm going to call that AS2. That's a favorable shift. And so that's what they're hoping to do by decreasing interest rates. All right, so, and then to get onto our final slide. This final slide is going a little bit, taking a bit of a sidestep, but a sidestep that I think is really important. Future impact on wages. So VCAA has had an obsession with wage growth over the last 3 years. They've asked questions about how AD policies impact wage growth quite a lot. And the RBA specifically mentioned weak wage growth in their press release. So this is important. What you need to know about this is AD policies do not impact wages, but there is an on-flow effect. It's important to note that although cash rate cuts do not directly impact wage growth, if the depreciation of the Australian dollar leads to increased exports, this may lead to increased derived demand for labour, which eventually will lead to increased levels of wage pressure. So that's one avenue of looking at it. We can also look at the fact that if we look at the cash flow, households have more cash and they're conducting more private consumption spending, increases aggregate demand, sends a signal to businesses they need to increase production, creates more derived demand for labour, puts upward pressure on wages. It's important to be able to step it out. Monetary policy does not deal with wages at all. It's about that increased demand for labour that will then lead to increased wage pressure. And that's essentially it on this update about the cash rate, how it's going to affect things, hopefully in really simple terms. If you have any questions about it at all, feel free to comment, send me an email. A few people have been doing that lately. That's great. I like helping. If there's anything else, so your exam being less than 3 weeks away, if there's anything else that you want to help on, or if there are topics that you want to go over, let me know and I'll see what I can do. I've got no classes at the moment, so I've got a lot more time for making dumb PowerPoints that will hopefully help people. Other than that, I hope you have a good day and I will see you next time. Bye.